Assessment.
If you do it now, she might be able to stay.
Hey, I think we can endure this. Again, we're trying to accommodate a lot of board members that have other schedules and stuff. We're going to go to assessment now, and I hope we can endure that before we have a break. Sorry about all the paper noise. I'm just catching up. Okay, that would be item 7. Assessment update, Pearson and the Pearson contract. We'd like to invite Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman and Assistant Superintendent Darren. We have 3 separate motions if we're moving forward on this, so we'll take one at a time. Didn't want to do that. Oh, I've got to turn this on just one sec. We're catching up here.
All right.
We do push a little paper here, but we know we want to be electronic. Okay, Deputy Superintendent, feel free
Appreciate
to
it.
introduce what we're doing here.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to come today and speak to the contract. We have Assistant Superintendent Darren Nilsson, who has been actively involved in this and working hard through it, so he's going to be presenting and then referencing the attachments that are provided.
And just as we get clear to the end in that, there's also, for board members' awareness, here we'll have Emily talk a little bit about how the communications will work. Is that what we're doing, Lorraine?
Yes,
Okay.
that'll
All
be
right.
item 7.2, so there's
All right.
it's separated into just 2
All right.
items.
Okay, Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. While Patty and I are sitting up here, it would be incorrect for me not to recognize that there are dozens of your employees have worked on this contract over the last several months. Wouldn't be an exaggeration to say hundreds of hours of employee time have gone into trying to get this contract with Pearson before you for your consideration today. Just for some context for those who are participating online in this meeting and those who are behind me, it's important to understand that this really started in 2017 with legislation requiring that the State Board of Education create a high school assessment. Prior to that, we had and we still have the state standards assessment. That assessment is for grades 3 through 8, but prior to that, it was for grades 3 through 11 and then shifted down to 3 through 10. And so that's what brings us here today for this contract, not just that assessment wants double work. To have to deal with 2 different vendors and 2 different assessment systems this coming year. When we started to draft and to craft the RFP for this product, there was a lot of discussion about making sure we wrote it in a way that allowed for as many options to come before the scoring committee, the RFP scoring committee, as possible. And so we did what I consider to be pretty innovative, and that was we wrote an RFP that allowed for 3 types of proposals to come into the scoring committee. An off-the-shelf proposal, those are things like SAT, ACT, a custom-built solution like we have with Questar and we had previously with AIR, or a hybrid solution. So we, at the time we crafted that, we didn't even know if there were hybrid solutions available, but we wrote the RFP to allow for those types of proposals to come in, and we received proposals in all 3 of those categories. And you'll kind of see that as we put this together. The committee then was charged with identifying the best solution for Utah, which they selected the Pearson proposal, which is a hybrid between our assessment items that have been written and developed aligned with the standards, the core standards which you guys have set forth for our educators to teach, and items from ACT's item bank. Questions come up already about what % of the items are which, and it's approximately going to be 50%. We still have to go through an item alignment analysis, which Utah educators will be involved with that. process. So I can't answer that specifically, but there'll be a blend of the two items. And it's really innovative because it allows us to keep instruction focused on the standards which you have set forth as a board, while still creating an assessment that will produce a predictive score for their college entrance test. So the legislation requires this test provide a predictive score for the student on the college readiness test, which currently is ACT, and that it can provide a growth score between 9th and 10th grade. And this solution meets those requirements. The other thing we did is we started, after the committee selected this product and vendor, is we've tried to produce a contract that's acceptable to the state board and in the best interest of the taxpayers and students in Utah. We tried to identify some optional items that the board may be interested in providing that aren't required as part of the legislation, but to do that in a timeline and in a process that would allow us to have some competitiveness or some negotiation with the pricing of these items. And so you'll see that there are three what we call the optional items. So benchmark assessments. We have introduced those a couple of years ago to our teachers, and they become quite popular. Our assessment directors that I meet with monthly have indicated high value, a perceived high value for the benchmark tests. We ran numbers on those, and it's about 80,000 benchmark tests were administered to students in grades 9 and 10 this current school year. And so we asked them to include pricing on that area. The other thing we asked them to do is to let us know how much would it cost for us to provide transadaptive summative tests in Spanish language. So not just translated, but adapted to take into account some of the complexities of language, converting from one to the other. And you'll see a price associated with that. The other thing, as those of you who've been around and worked with contracts with assessment vendors in the past, it's not uncommon to have additional needs come up over the course of the contract. And so rather than have to be completely subject to the vendor when that time comes to pass, we ask them to tell us how much it would cost for additional item development should that be needed in the future. And so that item's in the contract as well, and so the price controls are in place for that. I wanted to go to
Assistant Deputy Superintendent, there will be, when you get to a point where I know we presently have board questions or comments. When you get to a point where you want to receive those as you're doing your introduction, will you let us know, or do you prefer me just to interrupt you in the middle of your...
Yeah. If I was really skilled when I got done, there would be very few questions, but I don't know that I have that capacity.
So when you get to a pause moment or you're ready for a question, then I'll present those, because I don't want to interrupt with your
Should we do the cost?
with your flow. So do
Yeah,
you want the interruptions, or do you want...
Let's do one more slide, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay,
before
so
we
I'm
get
going to let you control that a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Unless it really stacks up. Okay.
All right, so one of the attachments in there is this one that shows from attachment E, it's the invoicing schedule. And we were talking about those options there, and you see those benchmark assessments, transadaptive, summative forms for Spanish, and then additional item developments. You can see the specific costs associated with those over the course of the contract, and an explanation of how those function. Another thing to keep in mind with this, on those optional items for benchmark assessments and also transadaptive, if we implement those, so benchmarks, for instance, if we implement those and we find in a couple of years teachers are not utilizing those the way we had expected based on feedback that we have, we can terminate that and save those costs. We're not committing to pay for that for the entire length of the contract. If USBE determines at some future point they'd like to terminate that option. The same thing is true for the transadaptive summative piece that's there. Obviously, the additional item development way out in 24-25, if we execute that, if there becomes a need to execute that, and the board would have to grant that, then obviously that's a cost we incur and we can't take that back. So I'll pause.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So I'm overly concerned that we're adding 50% of ACT questions to this test. Fairtesting.org just put out their updates for universities and colleges that are opting out of SAT and ACT scoring, and it's now up to 1,000. And that was up from 200 that I knew about 2 years ago. And it is growing ever more. They just announced 2 more universities and colleges that have opted out of that. So I'm concerned with the way the ACT has been changed. I'm concerned why we're allowing that much influence into our schools when we want to have more local control, more state control over our testing questions. Why such a large number?
Yeah, and that's certainly a valid concern. The challenge that we face is that legislative mandate to provide a score that's predictive of the student's performance on the statewide assessment or the college readiness test that's most commonly used in local universities, which right now is the ACT test. So that's one of the challenges or the cruxes between that concern that you've got and our desire to be able to meet that legislative requirement for this score to be predictive of their performance on the ACT.
Yes, I do.
Did you have a follow-up?
If I may. So you're saying that we're basically following statute, and the statute needs to reflect what's being trended on a national level. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I don't know if I've said it exactly like that. The statute it's very explicit that this test has to produce a predictive score for our students on the college readiness test most commonly used in local universities, which currently is the ACT. Which brings us to why we have the hybrid version, at least the ACT side of the hybrid. Those are there to help us address that requirement.
Do you have another follow-up? And then we've got some other board members that
I
want to
do,
comment.
but it might not be.
Wanna
It's not in
save
line
it?
to this conversation. It goes into a different avenue, but I will hold it.
Okay, all right. Board Member Cannon?
Thank you. I just have a tiny little question. So we've got a hybrid, so we've got Utah test bank items that we're using, and then we're using some of the others. On this option to create additional items, who would then be the ultimate owner of those items?
Great question. Those would be Utah items aligned with our standards, and we would own those items just like you own the items that will be moving into this bank.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up? Are you good? Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
So will there be regular item development part of the contract already? So is this just for an unforeseen need for extending that number of items developed?
Yeah. One of the concerns as we write the contract, especially because you'll notice this one goes out for 10 years. Now, USBE can terminate that at will along that process. If you determine this assessment meets your needs for that full time, we have a 10-year lifespan on this assessment. As we started working through the negotiation on this, we started to have concerns that there might be a need for more item development out there in the 24 year. And rather than at that time have Pearson tell us how much it would cost, we wanted to get that up front for the board to be able to see.
Okay. Please continue.
Okay. Well, I think we are to the point where we come to you to seek a motion to approve the contract as proposed. Again, understanding that there are some options in there that then require additional action from the board after considering that you approve the contract as proposed.
Okay, this is a step-by-step process
Yeah.
as we're moving forward. I'll take these in order. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
I move that we approve the Pearson contract for the 910 assessment.
Do we have a second? Lots of seconds. Did you get one? Comments? Board Member Lisa Cummins?
Question, will the parent review committee be able to have access to the ACT questions that will be a part of this new assessment?
No, and the parent review committee, by legislation again, has responsibility for the items in the 3rd through 8th grade test bank, and so the 9 and 10, there's not a parent review committee requirement currently associated with those items.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other discussion. The motion before the board is to approve the contract as proposed. Let's vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Will the ayes raise their hand? Okay, we have Board Member Cannon, Board Member Warner, Board Member Nielsen, Board Member Stokes, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Reby, Board Member Cummins. Anyone online yay? Or I mean on the
Yes,
phone?
Thursday. Yes, I'm here. Yay.
Okay, will you say your name and yes
It's Linda.
as a yes?
Yes.
Okay, will the nays, no, we'll, you need the nays. Okay, will the nays be recognized? Will you raise your hand? Okay, Board Member Bolter, Cummins, Wright.
Elisa is on the line, and I'm also a nay.
Okay, Elisa. Okay, the motion passes. Okay, please continue.
Okay, we also are coming to seek a motion to execute the transadaptive option for this contract. Again, with the understanding that part could be terminated at a future time if the board desires. The reason we come before you with this request is as assessments continue to evolve and improvements are made. This is one of those areas. It's not that long ago having a transadaptive test form for any language other than English was not possible. Pearson offers a transadaptive test in several languages. We've selected the language other than English that's most common in the state of Utah, and would like to be able to test those students in their native language when they qualify for that. And so we're testing content rather than their English proficiency.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I move that we execute the transadaptive option as included in the contract.
Okay, we have a motion to execute the transadaptive option as included in the contract. Is there a second? Seconded by Board Member Cannon. Discussion?
Can I make a comment, Mark? This
Okay.
is Linda.
Linda.
I had a conversation with Rich and I about Spanish speakers in my area, how they handled the stage testing. And there was some concern about the community about, and Rich agreed that there were concerns about the Spanish-speaking community and how they test it. So
Linda, you're kind of broken up there. Can you take your phone off
Sorry.
speaker? Does that help?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I said I had a conversation with Rich and I about the Spanish-speaking results in my area not too long ago, and he admitted, before he left us, he admitted that there were some problems with that. And so I'm hoping that if we pass this, that will take care of some of those problems that we've seen.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other discussion. So the motion before the board is that the board execute the transadaptive option as included in the contract. We're taking this to a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Okay.
Please continue.
And just a little definition, benchmarks are tests that are short and they're very targeted to specific strands in our core, usually between 10 and 20 test questions. This contract would include, I believe, 160 benchmark tests that would be available. They also would provide benchmark tests for all 4 of the primary science content, so physics, chemistry, biology, earth systems, secondary math 1, 2, and 3, and English language arts in grades 9 and 10. And we come before the board to seek a motion to execute the benchmark option as included in the contract.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I'm just wondering, as you've received feedback from the field, are teachers wanting these benchmarks, or is it more assessment directors? Are teachers wanting these as a form of formative assessment in their classroom?
That's a great question. I don't have as much access to teachers in my current position as I previously did, so I hear from assessment directors. I'm not aware of any districts that require the benchmarks to be administered through their administrative channels. Maybe our teacher board members could talk about that.
Okay, I'll just keep these in kind of an order, so save that thought unless Board Member Lisa Cummins can respond to that, or do you have something separate?
No, I can't, I have something separate.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. Board Member Reeby?
So as a teacher, I love the benchmark options. I think they are fantastic. You can go into these assessments, you can pick out the strand you want, you can give a 4-question assessment immediately. It grades it for you, it tells you why the kids are getting it wrong. It's just a really great way to be as efficient as possible. And with prior tools we have used, when that was turned off, teachers lamented greatly, because when you use 2 different programs to assess kids and then that you don't have the same tool, they aren't getting the same language. So this has been phenomenal for our teachers. And on a grades K through 6, we loved it. When I went to the STEM Action Center and we talked about some of the science standards and how we were developing those, they have responded greatly to that. When we've talked about math and language, they've also responded really positively at the STEM Action Center about how having these benchmark tests and being able to make quick adaptive assessments to help our kids better understand and us better understand what they don't understand, it's been a phenomenal tool. So I think it's been really widely received positively.
And as you know, I don't speak a lot as the chair here, but I need to speak on this. The benchmark option is very significant, and if we didn't have it, I think we're just taking a couple steps back. They need this tool or the option.
Mark, can I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Linda. And just for the sake of transparency, I agree with the benchmark option, but I wonder how much more it costs. Is it just part of the contract, or are we paying more for it?
Okay, we have a question on the cost. Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones is aggressively coming to the table. He is sitting down. He turned on his mic.
So Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Scott Jones. So this is exactly why, so great question. This is exactly why we did put a budget summary in with the packet so that you could see year by year what the costs are. And my understanding is it does a pretty good job of also addressing her question. Because, yes. Okay.
Scott, I'm looking at it, and it's saying base contract, but it says includes benchmarks and transadaptive. So it doesn't separate that out, at least the one that the assessment contracts budget schedule I'm looking at. I don't see that it's separating out the amount for the benchmarks. It gives a base contract that includes it.
It's right there. Yeah.
Okay, they're huddling.
Can I respond to that? So
Well,
Okay.
on page 62, which is attachment E in the contract, it identifies by year how much it would cost for the benchmarks, and it varies because you have some additional work up front. The first year it's $963,000.64, and then it goes down. The lowest amount it looks like is 2324, which is $358,000, a little bit over that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Board Member Reeby? Oh, okay. Okay, what we don't have on the table here is a motion to execute the benchmark option as included in the contract. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second, Board Member Reeby. Discussion, Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Not to the motion, but a question that just came up. Does any data stay with Pearson or with ACT College Board? or not the College Board, but the ACT folks?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We did have Whitney, our data security privacy person, review that. I don't know the specific answers for that, and I don't know if she's with us right now, but I know it came through data privacy and was approved, the contract.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think that question's relevant to the motion, but we can get that
No,
answered.
it's not, but yep.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
before we leave this, or quickly, we'll come back to you, Board Member Lisa Cummins. So we have a motion before the board is to execute the benchmark option as included in the contract. So let's vote on it. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Will the ayes be recognized? Will you raise your hand? We have Board Member Cannon, Warner, Nielsen, Stokes, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Reby, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Linda, are you voting yes or no?
Yes. Yes. I'm voting yes.
Okay. The voting was unanimous. Okay, now we're going to get the
No.
no's. So those that want to be on the no side, will you please raise your hand and I'll recognize you. Board Member Bolter, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Wright. Elisa, are you weighing in? She might have gone offline, sorry. Okay. All right, motion passes. Any-
Thank you. That turns us loose on a lot of work that has to be done before this coming school year with Pearson. So, and I should point out, this is a pretty innovative solution. In talking to Pearson and other folks in the assessment world, we're the only state, or the first, however you want to look at it, who has this hybrid type of solution for our statewide, and part of our statewide assessment system.
Well, I applaud all your work in creating the options and that, and I'm also pretty excited about having two different vendors working with our team. I think that will improve, becomes a little bit competitive on service and a few other things. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to what's going to happen on assessment moving forward. Board Member Reby, did you have a comment?
I would also like to thank all the work that they have done. Board Member Lear and I were on an RFP, and the work that Faytan and everyone has done, as board and staff, has just been phenomenal. It's kind of a unique situation because we do want to maintain our Utah standards, but also be predictive. So I really appreciate how you guys thought outside the box, worked hard to work with lots of different vendors, and it was really quite exciting to, and I use that sincerely, to see this grow and be great.
Thank you, Board Member Reby. I also should have recognized all of the work. We had board members assigned to the RFP side and then also on the selections separately, and it was a lot of work. Appreciate your due diligence there. Okay, I think we're not done with this subject. Isn't there there's another piece?
Yeah, we would like to update the board as to where we are with the work we've been doing on our communications plan for our 3 through 8th grade state standards test. And if you give me a few minutes, I'd love to go through some information. I know if your schedule still allows for that.
Yes, I think it's important that we get that covered, and then we'll break for lunch.
Okay. This slide here, and I don't think it's in your packet, but it just gives a little bit of a history of the assessment. And I want to start back at 2012. That's when we started offering the ACT statewide. It wasn't required for all juniors, but it was offered, and many districts chose to start offering that to 11th graders. In 2014, we started computer adaptive testing, which was done in conjunction with the American Institute of Research and became titled SAGE. And that contract expires this year. In 2017, I mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 220 called for separate tests between the 3rd and 8th grade and the 9th and 10th grade, remembering that they have different requirements associated with each of those. So our contract with AIR came to an end, and now we went to RFP for both of these solutions. The board has accepted contracts with both providers, and we will start in 18-19 the high school test as well as a new test for grades 3 through 8 or a new vendor for sure. So I mentioned there are specific requirements associated with these tests. So the 3rd through 8th grade test in statute, they tell us exactly which grades and content needs to be assessed. It also identifies it has to be a criterion reference test rather than a norm reference test. Needs to be aligned with our core standards and administered online. These are the requirements for the high school test. Again, there's just those 2 primary requirements, that it's predictive of the student's college score and that we can get a growth score between grades 9 and 10. So the communication process in January, I came to the board with $44,000 of proposed carry forward money to seek your approval to allow us to use that to help develop a communications plan and strategy, and also rebrand our 3 through 8 state standards assessment. When that was approved, we went through a process of identifying a communications company, and BWP was selected. And they were selected off of a state-approved list, primarily because of the work that they submitted to us to review. They also have a history of working with government entities, including Granite School District and the governor's office, some of his sections. That took quite a bit of time in trying to identify. The first part of our plan was to identify a brand or a name to associate with that, and it seemed like it started out with about 50 names and it evolved down to where we had around 10, and then you go into an extensive web search to find out if there's anything in the world that uses that name that has a negative connotation, and that lists what starts out as seeming like an easy process. There's almost no name that doesn't have some association out there with something that we don't want to affiliate with. So we got through that process, and we ended up with this as the name for our assessment system for the state standards assessment: RISE, Readiness, Improvement, Success, and Empowerment. And that's the logo that they helped us design and develop. And so we'll be moving forward with that. There's more to the plan, though, than just renaming. These are the steps. We had the brand research, which they've completed, the name and brand, they've completed. The messaging is the primary goal of this plan. As we talked about our target audience, as you know, education has as many stakeholders as any business there is, probably in the world. As we talked about who our target audience on communication was, we identified teachers as our primary source that we're trying to communicate these changes, both the things that are going to stay the same and the things that are going to change, because our teachers are the primary voice with our parents and their families. So trying to make sure that our teachers have clear information about this assessment, the changes and the similarities, and can communicate that articulately to their students and their families is our primary goal. But you'll see there are other materials they'll produce that will help us with a broader audience. And so you'll see eventually social media, including some video products that will come with that. So during the time when we came to you with the Questar contract in February, there were some concerns raised by the board about this perception that the test hasn't changed that much, and this worry that renaming it might be perceived as some kind of an underhanded attempt to hide something. And so I want to make sure that we're really clear on our communication plan. That's not our intent. So we want to highlight for our community what's different and what's the same. So these are the things that are changes. That now we only test grades 3 through 8 instead of what originally started out with 3 through 11, and then most recently 3 through 10. So different audiences will see this test. We have a new provider, Questar Assessment. We think that's important. I know when I was an assessment director and the American Institute of Research was selected as our vendor, there were people who had personal feelings and concerns about that vendor. Whether those are justified or not, I don't know, but I think it's important to identify we do have a different vendor. There's a new interface of parents or students and our parents as they log into the training sites, and the interfaces, they will look different and feel different. This is one of the biggest changes. Instead of a item adaptive test where we answer as a test taker, we answer a question, then there's an algorithm that determines what my next question is going to be based on my response. This is done, this adaptive is done in stages, and so I'll answer a battery of questions. It'll make an analysis based on those answers, and then it'll move me in a different path than perhaps my peer. That's going to look quite a bit different to our students, because on an item adaptive test, the student answers a question and you cannot go back because the decision's been made in the testing algorithms about that. in multi-stage, within the stage, you can have full navigation as a student, forwards, backwards, revision, until you move on to the next stage. And that's going to feel significantly different to our students. And I think it's, again, another advancement in adaptive testing and online testing for our students. We'll have new and enhanced reports. One of the most important parts of making an assessment system valuable to its users is having the information available to them in a timely way and in a way that they can interpret it and use it and make decisions based on it. And so we've started working with stakeholder groups right now for the individual student report, and we'll continue to work throughout the summer with groups of educators and others to develop class level reports. And then the writing has been removed except for grades 5 and 8. So those are the significant changes. Let's talk about what's the same. The test is still aligned to the Utah core standards, which means we'll use the item bank that we own that's coming back to us from AIR or SAGE, and those will be used in our items in this new system, RISE. It will work as a state board system to maintain the performance level descriptors, scale scores, and trend data. You have 5 years in the state of Utah of comparable data, which, if you look across states, assessment is so ripe with change, it's hard to find that kind of trend data. And it has a great value to those who are policymakers, administrators, and even classroom teachers who have 5 years worth of classroom data, trend data to look at and use to make decisions. So we'll work to maintain that. One of our challenges is with removing writing out of the ELA scale score. That presents some unique challenges to determine if we can continue to use that scale score. So there'll be additional work there. And then the interim and benchmark assessments, these productivity tools that our teachers value, which are optional for them, those will still be there. And then it's criterion referenced as well, versus norm referenced is what the ACT is, where it allows us just to look and see how we do compared to our peers, not necessarily compared to a standard or a set of standards. So looking forward, we have, as we move into the summer, we'll begin communicating with our groups, educator stakeholder groups. The first of that will be with assessment directors in 2 weeks, and then Superintendents Association, Deputy Norman and myself will be presenting to them the last week in June. I've put my name on the agenda of curriculum directors, CT directors, special ed directors, EL directors, literacy specialist meetings in the fall, so that we can get in front of those groups. And then again, the media campaign that we'll have through the other channels will begin as well. Those will start primarily the first part of August, as we believe teachers start to think more intently about coming back to school and what changes to consider. We'll offer the interims and benchmarks beginning this school year, and then the summative tests will be delivered this school year as well. So we're excited to be able to tell you that we're progressing as scheduled, and we don't have any delays at this time, which is really good news.
Okay. There's a few questions or comments. We'll start with Board Member Bolter.
Sorry, I just had a question actually to the second document, the testing facts.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, and then I'd like a follow-up. Is this what's going to be sent out to parents? This testing facts?
Let me pull it up. This one right here.
Yes.
Graphic organizer. It's our first attempt internally in working with our provider. Now the provider, as we've been working, they're still developing many of their materials. This tool could be used with educators or with parents. I believe it'll be available online before the day's out. But again, it's a high-level view of some of the changes, and we'll have to have different levels of communication depending on what the user's interface is with the system.
Okay. I have a concern with the very first one that says, why is Utah changing assessments? I feel like that's misleading because it's not changing assessments. We're keeping all the same data and everything. We're just changing a name. And so that just feels really misleading.
Okay.
I maybe just, why is Utah changing the name? But the assessment is still the same.
Yeah, and I guess the reason
There have been some changes, but not substantially enough to change the whole assessment.
Yeah, I guess the reason I didn't see that, I appreciate you bringing that up, though, is what used to be in 3rd through 10th grade 1 assessment. Now we have 2 that are different. So that's probably why I didn't see it the way that you do.
Okay. Board Member Reeby.
I've given tests for the last 16 years, and I've seen them change so much. And I like that these assessments now are reflecting the growth that our students have instead of proficiency and mastery. As I've seen our kids go through these assessments, we would give, whether they were proficient or not. With this broad spectrum of scores that you can now receive, you can actually see the growth. As I look at our fingertip facts and I look at the kids that are not succeeding, I can see now where they are succeeding and where we can do better to meet them. In the past, we've had things that weren't adaptive so that we didn't really know where they were going and what they understood. Now we have a better understanding of what they know because it is adaptive. I like that it's into groups. That's a really great change because kids do struggle with not being able to go backwards and forwards. For them to be able to change an answer is really great for our students. They sometimes, and we encourage them, if you have a problem, just guess and then go back, because just like when you're playing soccer, your brain gets warmed up and you want to go back. So this has been a great change for them. I like that it's criterion reference, so that it's now asking us whether we're standards-based. We are moving towards proficiency-based grading, where we're trying to see if we are proficient in our standards. So this helps us. I think this aligns to our mission as a board because it's giving us tools for greater efficiencies. So as we move through that list of all the changes that have been made, and I have watched the growth of these assessments, I think that we are pivoting to a spot where we can laser point our teaching towards certain standards that we're missing. That it's adaptive now so that we can say, oh, ELLs aren't failing because it's just not in our language anymore. That's been great. That's a great change for us so that we can now meet, is it the way that we're teaching it or is it just the language barrier? And as our mission says, it needs to be culturally responsive. So I think that we have made some great changes. So thank you so much for looking at all these changes and samenesses.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. Question. A while back, I had asked for a list of percentages of donation of questions for the SAGE. You've done that with the Pearson 50-50, but what about for the SAGE and now the RISE test? How many are coming from Oregon, Nevada, Montana, various other states that have contributed to the SAGE prior, and how many are Utah-based, and how many are coming from AIR or now Questar into that circulation? So do we have a breakdown of those percentages?
Yeah, if I failed to send you that request, I apologize. The answer that you'd asked me earlier, and I can get the board a response to that question as well. The items that we're bringing over the items that will be used this coming fall will be items that we've owned coming out of AIR Bank, which are some percentage of those have been written by Utah, and that percentage continues to increase each year. I just don't have that number in front of me.
Okay. Would you, if I may, Chair, follow up?
Follow up.
Can I see what we started out with so I can see that growth of how it's expanded to include more Utah questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And to answer these questions, if we could just reference this meeting and then share with the whole board what the answer to be relevant. Thank you. The only things, I'm not seeing anything else. Your business is taken care of. Really the only thing standing between.
Chair Huntsman,
Yes,
this is Elisa Ellis. I have a comment, if I may.
you may.
I am still really concerned about the whole rebranding aspect. I understand the need, but it just feels like in a lot of different avenues we are trying to encourage people to take a test. And in an effort to do that, we inadvertently trample on someone's right to choose for themselves. And I've said this before, we're not often asking the question, why do you think this isn't valuable? And so I just think we just need to be very cautious moving forward with this rebranding. And if I'm going to be honest, I feel like I need to start an ad campaign to let people know that it is the same test. And this is nothing against staff because they're just doing what the board voted on, but I just wanted to put my concerns out there with this because I've already seen and heard people talking about that we don't have SAGE anymore. And anyways, I think we've put schools in an awkward position because accountability measures don't mesh very cohesively with parental rights. And so there's some work that has to be done to make sure that it's a cohesive unit and that we don't trample on the rights of people to choose for themselves. And that's all I had to say about it. But thank you.
Okay, Board Member Reevy.
The fact that we want to maintain Utah values puts us in a unique situation where we need to use these same questions because we are concerned about Utah values. I think that as a person who does assessments and works in assessments and works with my assessment department, most teachers understand that it's the platform that had to be replaced because the questions were written by us, for us, a large percentage of them. And you can disagree if you'd like, but I think that we have a group that has peer reviewed these, and my understanding, and in the schools that I work with, I understand why this is happening. So.
Thank you. Board Member Warner.
I think it's really interesting. I've heard from a number of, especially kids, that I really like some of the changes, and so I understand the rebranding because of some of these major changes. The idea of going back and forth is critical. That is so different from what the kids have had. Because I've heard from kids that have looked at the questions and then want to go back and answer them, and it's done. And so I think that this is a fair assessment. I think that's a great change. I'm okay with the rebranding because it's a different company. It's going to be it's a different mechanism in the way the test is running. Aren't we going to continue making we're going to be adding to that bank, right? Aren't we going to continue doing that? So I understand that we're using some of the same test questions, but with this multi-stage adaptive, whatever it's called, we're going to have, there are going to be different questions as well, correct? So it's not quite SAGE, it's not the same questions exactly. Is that correct?
Well, so unless the standards change, the items, the things that we're measuring will still be the same. And so to the points that the concerns that have been raised, the assessment questions should always be aligned with your standards, which the board sets for the state. Assessment shouldn't drive instruction. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I don't like the teachers teaching to the test. And that always concerns me that belief is there because what the test just should measure the standards. If it's well developed, it just measures learning against the standards. And so if a teacher's teaching to the test, they should be teaching to the standards, which is what they're required to do by board rules. So.
Okay. I think we're probably about done. Thank you. And just as a little shout out, I have had 2 different teachers that represent 2 different grades and classes comment. They said, hey, I had a problem or a challenge. The one that was really excited was kindergarten, and I believe kindergarten, not first grade. And they said, we communicated to you guys, to your staff, instant response, instant dialogue back and forth, like, thank you for caring, because they feel like they were listened to, and of course they're looking forward to betterments along the way. But thank you. It's refreshing to get those kind of comments. I know whether this is a big organization and you and your staff are really busy, and thank you for rolling this out. So we'll see where this goes. Thank you. We're going to take a quick lunch break. Appreciate again everyone's flexibility on agendas and schedules, and as soon as we get our lunch in us, let's get back in here and roll our sleeves up and go to work. Thank you.